When I was old enough, my parents arranged for me to marry a man called Elkanah. And we live in Ramah. Now, there are 3 Ramahs in Israel, but ours is the one right up in the centre. And it's not all that far away from Shiloh. Elkanah was a kind man who loved me dearly. A man who was quite well off, so we lived in a comfortable home. I should have been the happiest woman in Israel, but I was the most miserable. First of all, there was another woman in the marriage. Why did my husband ever think it was a good idea to have 2 wives? I was always thinking, does he love me best, or does he love Peninnah, the other wife, best? I felt I had to compete for his love every day. The second problem was that although Elkanah and I had been married for many years, the Lord had not enabled me to have children. One by one, my friends all got married and had their babies, and I watched them nursing them and playing with them. But I had empty arms. Why hadn't God given me a child? And then there was the shame I had to bear. Any married woman who could not have children was looked down upon by the other women, especially those who had sons. And my grief was 4 times worse when Peninnah had no trouble getting pregnant, and she seemed to have a child every other year. It was so hard, and she would flaunt her children at every opportunity, especially in front of our husband or the other women. I was desperately forlorn and dejected. It was even harder when Elkanah would take us all up to Shiloh for the sacrifice, to worship the Lord every year. In one way, I really looked forward to our visit. We villagers all walked together and we chatted, and we were so thankful about the way God had brought us to this land and had helped us defeat our enemies. And at Shiloh, it was so exciting to see many of our friends, our fellow Israelites, all gathered together, worshipping the Lord. But in another way, it was the worst time of the year for me. Well, when Elkanah presented his sacrifice, he was given a portion of the meat back to share with his family. And Peninnah and her children all got a piece each. But I only got one portion because I had no children. I could see the look of triumph in her eyes. And year after year it was the same. Peninnah would taunt me as we went to the temple. She upset me so much I burst into tears and cried my heart out. I couldn't eat the delicious meal, it just stuck in my throat. Why are you crying, Hannah? Elkanah would ask me. Why aren't you eating? Why be downhearted just because you don't have children? Isn't having me better than having 10 sons? Well, why didn't Elkanah think of that before he married 2 wives? Why didn't he remember that right at the beginning God said a man and a woman will be united in one, and they will become one in God's eyes? How could he forget the stories of our ancestors, Leah and Rachel? Leah was the one who produced all the children, but she couldn't win Jacob's affection, her husband. Rachel couldn't have children for about 20 years, and yet Jacob loved her best. Well, when I thought about that, I had a bit of a glimpse of how Peninnah felt. It must be awful for her to produce all the children and yet not be loved like I was. But then again, her taunt seemed to be saying, why bother trusting in God? As for Elkanah, he'd moved on. He had his sons, so my childlessness was no longer a problem. He was just not interested in sharing my sufferings. One year during a sacrificial meal at Shiloh, I was at my wit's end. I just couldn't take any more. Especially Peninnah's cruel words about my childlessness. Now, Peninnah did taunt me, and Elkanah didn't understand, but it was the Lord who had withheld a child from me. So in the end, my battle was with the Lord. I got up and went into the Lord's house to pray to the Lord God I love with all my heart. I poured out my extreme torment to the Lord. All the bitterness that had been festering in my heart came rushing out like pus from a boil. And I made this vow: O Lord Almighty, if you will look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime. And as a sign that he's been dedicated to you, I will not cut his hair. I promised God that my son would be a Nazarite, wholly dedicated to the Lord all his life. I was so upset and crying that I didn't see Eli, the priest, sitting in his usual place at the entrance to the Lord's house. As Eli watched me, weeping bitterly, he saw my lips moving but no sound coming out. He thought I'd been drinking. Must you come here drunk, he said. Throw away your wine. Oh no, sir, I said. I haven't been drinking. I haven't been drinking wine or anything stronger. I'm discouraged and I've been pouring out my heart to the Lord. Don't think I'm a wicked woman, for I have been praying with great anguish and sorrow. Well, in that case, Eli said, may the God of Israel grant you the request you have made him. Oh, thank you, sir, I said. I went back to the family group and enjoyed the meal. What a privilege to be able to pour out my heart to the living God who understood my desperation. My heart was lifted and I didn't feel sad anymore. And Eli the priest had given me courage to think that maybe God would answer my prayer positively. So we all got up early the next morning and went to worship the Lord again before we went home. After our return to Rama, it wasn't long before the Lord did answer my prayer. And he said yes. And it wasn't long before my baby bump was showing, but I didn't care who saw it. I was so happy. My time for delivering came at last. It was so painful, but the many hours in labour were forgotten when I gave birth to the most beautiful baby boy ever born. I named him Samuel because I asked the Lord of him. So the next year, Elkanah and the rest of the family got ready for their annual trip to the sacrifice, for the sacrifice to the Lord. But I did not go. I said to Elkanah, look, I'll wait until the boy's weaned. I'll stay here and we'll take him to the Lord's house and leave him there permanently. And Elkanah agreed. Whatever you think is best, stay here for now and may the Lord help you keep his promise, your promise. I really appreciated having Elkanah's support at that time. So I stayed at home and cared for Samuel until he was weaned. How quickly those 3 years passed and my darling boy became more and more precious. Now, it was common knowledge around Israel that Eli's sons Hophni and Phinehas were scoundrels. They had no respect for the Lord and they interfered when people made their sacrifices. And they did not allow their sacrifice to proceed reverently. They were greedy and demanded more than they were entitled to. And they were sleeping with the temple women. So the sin of these men was very serious in the Lord's sight. And the other women kept saying to me, why would you pray to God for a son? And then when he gives you a son, take that precious boy and leave him in that godless place with those godless men. My answer to them was that in all my years of shame and struggle, I fully learned to trust the Lord. I had made a special promise to give Samuel back to the Lord, and I trusted him totally that he would look after Samuel. Now, you may not be called to give up a child in this way, but it's important for all of us to remember, if we have children, that they are not ours, but they are the Lord's. And each of us have the privilege of caring for them and bringing them up to know God's ways and to help them love and obey the Lord. They're not ours to keep, but they are the Lord's. And finally the day came when I had to take Samuel to the temple. For the sacrifice, we took along a 3-year-old bull, a basket of flour and some wine. After sacrificing the bull, we brought Samuel to Eli. "Sir, do you remember me?" I asked as Eli peered at me. "I am the woman who stood here several years ago and prayed to the Lord. I asked the Lord to give me this boy, and he's granted my request. Now I'm giving him to the Lord, and he will belong to the Lord his whole life." Now Samuel was with us, of course, and he took it all in as we worshipped the Lord there. He really listened when I prayed. Now this time I didn't pray silently with just my lips moving, but I prayed out loud for all to hear. "My heart is happy in the Lord. I feel strong in my God. I laugh at my enemies. I'm very happy in my victory. There's no holy God like the Lord. There is no God but you. There is no rock like our God." The difficulties I had experienced in my childlessness, the taunting by Penina, and my husband's lack of understanding made me realise that I needed to depend on God. He heard my cries, and he used these troubles to bring me closer to him. Now I am grounded on the rock. Don't continue bragging. Don't speak proud words. That includes you, Penina, because the Lord God knows everything. He leads and judges his people. The bows of strong soldiers break, and weak people become strong. The people who had plenty of food in the past must now work to get food. Those who were hungry in the past now grow fat on food. The woman who was not able to have children now has 7 children. Well, that's how it felt. It was so great. But the woman who had many children is sad because her children are gone. Others may boast about their strength and ability, but I was a weak and useless woman. All I had to offer the Lord was deep anguish, sorrow and crying. And yet he enabled me, a powerless woman, to have a child. It is the Lord God who determines who is weak and who is strong. The Lord causes people to die, and he causes them to live. He sends people down to the grave, and he can raise them up again. The Lord makes some poor and some rich. He humbles some people, and he honours others. He raises the poor from the dust and takes away their sadness. People jostle with each other to have power and influence, not realising that it is just a waste of time. It is God who humbles some and raises others. He is the one who appoints and destroys leaders. He is the one who rewards and punishes. God holds the life and death of every person in his hands. And this is the God who answered my prayer. The Lord God made the whole world, and the whole world belongs to him. He protects his holy people. He keeps them from stumbling. But evil people will be destroyed. They will fall in the darkness. Their power won't help them win. The Lord destroys his enemies, and the Lord will judge lands that are even far away. He will give power to his chosen king. He will make his king strong. People who trust in their power and influence will not win. The Lord is in charge, and he protects his people, while wicked people come under his judgment. It is the Lord God who formed the whole world and all that is in it. He has supreme power and is in charge of everything. How precious it is to know and worship the one true God, who knows the end from the beginning, and who will look after us, his faithful followers, and destroy his enemies. And so after worshipping at the temple, we said goodbye to our young son. We left little Samuel serving the Lord under the supervision of Eli, the priest at Shiloh, and we returned home to Ramah. How I miss my dear little boy with his trusting heart and loving nature. Each year I would make Samuel a little tunic and take it with me when we went to worship the Lord. And so much love went into every stitch. Now Samuel looked very grown up in his little tunic modelled on the priest's garment, and he helped Eli and served the Lord. We would always chat to Eli and check that everything was all right with Samuel. And Eli would always bless Elkanah and I, saying, "May the Lord give you more children together to take the place of the one who you gave to the Lord." And the Lord was gracious to me. Over the next few years, I had 3 more sons and 2 daughters. It didn't take away the aching hole in my heart caused by Samuel's absence, but I turned my loss into constant prayers for him, that the Lord would watch over Samuel and protect him. I couldn't believe how much Samuel grew between our annual visits, and I could see that just as he was growing taller, he was growing in his faith in God, and he was growing in favour with the Lord and with the people. What a privilege it was to be chosen by the Lord, to have Samuel, to care for him for those 3 short years, to teach him all that I had learned about trusting the Lord, and then to give him back to God. You will see later how dedicated he was to God and his purposes, and the difference he made in his world. In the last 2 sentences of my prayer, when I left Samuel at the temple, I mentioned a king. The Lord will give power to his king. He will make his chosen king strong. Now, mention of a king has made some people think that I couldn't possibly have said that. There was no king in Israel at the time. But with all the problems we have had with many of the judges lately, I think a king will be appointed sooner rather than later. And the Lord had actually told Moses about this a long time ago. I didn't know it then, but my son would mentor both the first king of Israel, who was Saul, the son of Kish, and the second king, King David, the greatest of all the Israelite kings. He would be an ancestor of Jesus Christ, the King of Kings. Praise God that I, a powerless woman, was part of God's plans. Last week, if you were in church, you would have heard Elisha from India speaking about his life journey. He was born into the lowest of the low castes in India. They were previously called the Untouchables, but now they're known as the Dalits. And they are given all the dirty jobs around. Anything that others will not touch, they are given to do. Many families live on garbage dumps, looking for food to eat and things they can use. They are so poor they have few opportunities to better themselves. They are considered subhuman by other Hindus. They are so despised that if their shadow falls on a higher Hindu, they are polluted. And even wealthy Dalits, nobody will shake their hands. Now, Elisha was brought up in a Christian Dalit family in very poor circumstances. As he grew up and looked around him, he was so angry that God allowed all this extreme poverty, especially for Christian pastors and those who trusted the Lord. So he left the church and he became a communist and later an atheist. But that did not make him happy or fulfilled either. Are you like Elisha, thinking you can get by in life without God? You don't need God telling you what to do. You can run your own life, thank you very much. And anyway, there are too many hypocrites in the church. Many people are like this. Instead of giving the Lord his rightful place in their hearts, they deny the reality of the true God. They search for fulfillment in work, money and fame, or selfish dreams. And some even turn to alcohol and drugs in desperation to deaden the pain. Now, one Christmas day, Elisha was in for a surprise. A good friend had invited him to church, and very reluctantly he went along. Now, Elisha heard something that we in the Old Testament could only dream about. The time when the Messiah would come, give his sinless life on the cross for us, to restore us to fellowship with God. Instead of having to go through these sacrifices that we have to go through, Jesus Christ died once and for all. Now, Elisha knew the message was for him. He spoke to the pastor, who explained to him that God does not want people to live in poverty, but it's a tool used by Satan to bring destruction. Elisha then saw that he was God and gave his life back to the Lord. Like me, Elisha realised that God is in charge of everything, no matter what powerful people say. And be warned, the Lord destroys his enemies. The Lord will judge lands that are even far away. And that includes you Aussies. Now, this poor man who had no power, no resources, no standing in the community, God called him to start a home for children, for orphan children, for the Dalit children who had no hope in life. Now, we're talking about someone despised in the community, powerless and with no resources. And yet the Lord had enabled him to set up the orphanage, and now he's been able to set up a school for these children and for those from the surrounding villages. As I said in my song of praise, the Lord lifts up the poor from the dust. He takes away their sadness. He makes them important and seats them with princes and places for honoured guests. Well, perhaps you may think, well, I don't have any good qualities. I'm not much use to anyone. Why would God be interested in me? Hang on. God is more interested in your availability than your ability. Just as he used me and other unimportant women in the Bible, the Lord will delight in using you if you offer yourself to him. Especially if you think you're a very weak, uninfluential person. Now, in your New Testament, the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1, 26 and 7, brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. Isn't that amazing? We are all welcome in God's kingdom, no matter how weak or powerless we think we are. So go to it. Offer yourself unreservedly to God who knows you through and through and loves you through and through. Today is your opportunity for a new beginning.